While the core focus is on the action and conflict, Onimusha is no stranger to its own little love stories, most of which, unfortunately, tend to end in tragedy or separation. Every console Onimusha game holds some form of romantic subplot, and with the exception of Jacques and Michel, they have all ended at best in a bittersweet way, with 2 ending in a tragic death. The only one that doesn't is Jubei and Oyu. While neither end their interactions with death, they were forced to part ways due to Oyu's decision to remain with her husband Nagamasa Asai and her 3 daughters, Cha-Cha, Ohatsu and Ogo. However, after parting following the end of Samurai's destiny, the events of Blade Warriors begin her story with the siege of Odani Castle, leading to the death of Nagamasa, rendering Oyu a widow. In canon, she eventually remarries to General Katsui Shibata in 1582, before finally ending her own life after Katsui is killed by Hideyoshi in 1583. However, that leaves 9 years that she was without a spouse. So what if she decided to finally act on her feelings for Jubei in that time? Following Jubei's successful first meeting with Kaede, Kotaro reports the attack on Odani Castle, and Jubei, unable to go himself out of fear for his feelings for her resurfacing, asks Kotaro to help her instead. He does so, and after reigniting her will after mentioning Jubei, leaves at her request to save her daughters. Oyu, now more hopeful knowing that Jubei is still in the fight, begins to consider her options now that Odani has fallen and Asai is dead. Later, she is asked by Kotaro to meet by Gifu's waterfall, only to be met by Jubei. After a bit of convincing, she agrees to work together to defeat Nobunaga. By this point, not only is she focused on the downfall of her brother, but also what she and her daughters will do now that Odani has fallen. After Nobunaga is defeated by the Oni, Jubei returns to the Yagyu village, and after giving it some more thought, Oyu finally decides to take her daughters to the village and meet with Jubei. He is left stunned at her arrival, even more so when, after hesitating, asks if she and her daughters can stay there now that Nagamasa is dead and Odani Castle has fallen. While inwardly happy to see her again, he asks whether or not she's thought this through, to which she confirms, claiming that there is nothing left for her family in Omi province. Jubei agrees to take them in, and Oyu, now living within the village, decides to keep the identity of Oyu, allowing the narrative that she and her daughters died at Odani Castle. As one would expect, Oyu and Jubei living within the same village would lead to them rekindling their relationship, and without the need to choose between him and her late husband, the 2 would eventually marry, with Oyu now acting as a stepmother to Jubei's 5 sons, and Jubei treating her daughters like his own. As a result, Oyu never meets General Katsui Shibata, and doesn't take her own life following his death at the hands of Hideyoshi Hashiba in 1583. Both would remain uninvolved with the events of Demon Siege, leaving the events of that game completely unchanged. As they grow up, Oyu's daughters eventually become quite close with their step-siblings, and Ohatsu in particular takes to training as well. She, however, still favours firearms over blades, so Jubei contacts Magawichi to train her, to which Magawichi agrees. Unfortunately, Munenori's accident still occurs during a training session with his father, now named Sekishusai, and out of desperation, Oyu decides to give her own eye in order to save his life. This would inevitably cost Oyu her life, something that she accepts to save her stepson, and her death affects the rest of her family deeply. While Sekishusai blames himself, her daughters, while grieving heavily, learn to forgive him, knowing that the injury that led to her death was nothing more than an accident. While she's grieving, Munenori begins spending more time with Ohatsu in a similar fashion to Soki in canon, which in turn would lead to seeing her eventual forgiveness for her mother's death. Knowing that Oyu's death pained her more than himself, he decides that if she can forgive their father, then so could he. As a result of Ohatsu's influence, Munenori does not actually grow up bitter and hateful towards the Yagyu or Oni, and instead focuses more on training and improving himself to ensure such a tragedy could not repeat. With his new eye coming from Oyu rather than another Yagyu, Munenori is left without the demon eye, leaving him weaker here than in canon. He, knowing this, only further dedicates himself to his training, hoping that his skill would increase in order to compensate. This leaves Munenori without the ability to magically increase his strength and agility like normal, but also increases his base level skill, meaning that while he's weaker than he is in canon when he uses it, he is actually stronger than his canon version is without it. As for Hideyoshi, with Oyu's daughters living within the Yagyu village, Cha-Cha is not forced to become Hideyoshi's concubine, leaving him without a biological male heir. While he does marry another woman known as Nine, she fails to produce any children, with his adopted son, Hidekatsu Hashiba, originally the fourth son of Nobunaga, dying in 1586. In the end, Hideyoshi decides to adopt Ieyasu's second son, Ogimaru Tokugawa, and names him his successor, giving him the name Hideyasu Toyotomi. With his focus on Hideyasu, he decides against adopting him into the Yuki clan like usual, instead deciding to raise him himself, hoping to mould him into the perfect successor. As he grows up, while he maintains some of his usual empathy, his father's constant promises of ruling the country and beyond leads him to becoming more ambitious. When the Genma Triumvirate are freed by Mitsunari and they make contact with Hideyoshi, he specifically mentions the plan of Hideyasu's succession, leading to Mitsunari and later the Triumvirate treating Hideyasu significantly better than in canon, especially when they realise that he is the Black Oni. Knowing that the Black Oni is the only entity capable of stopping them, they do everything to maintain his loyalty to them and Hideyoshi. Hideyasu is still sent to fight in the Kyushu campaign as well as abroad, and while he is disturbed by the lengths some soldiers would go to earn personal glory, it isn't enough to convince him to give up fighting like normal, simply asking Hideyoshi, upon returning to Kyoto, not to have him partake in such savagery. This pattern of trying to avoid more gruesome conflicts would continue, with Hideyoshi, seeing his lingering compassion, continually making excuses, labelling their enemies as things like bandits, criminals, or traitors. While he still doesn't like these methods, Hideyasu chooses to place his trust in Hideyoshi due to being the only real positive constant in his life, with Hideyoshi still treating him quite well. In 1596, upon the Omen Star's appearance, Hideyasu, while noticing Hideyoshi's change, still maintains his trust for his father, and upon seeing Genma beginning to wear the Toyotomi crest, sometimes finds himself on missions alongside them, occasionally working alongside the likes of Danyamon. While this means that he never earns the nickname Soki by burning Genma trees, his signature blue armour still earns him the nickname Blue Demon. In the Yagyu village, Munenori, now inheriting the name Jubei thanks to his exceptional skill, is aiding Sekishusai in training the next generation of Yagyus, including his niece Akane. However, he is soon asked by his father to investigate the Omen Star and reappearance of the Genma. Ohatsu, now a highly skilled musket in her own right, decides to go with him, and the two travel Japan in order to learn more of the Genma's resurgence. Meanwhile, Tenkai faces Claudius on the rooftops of Sakai as he does normally, but after he is forced to retreat, nobody is left to save the town from the Genma hordes, leaving the area with no survivors. At the end of their fight, instead of challenging Tenkai to find the Black Oni, Claudius remarks that the Genma have already found him, gloating that nothing can stop them now. While this vague remark initially leads Tenkai to believe that they managed to kill the Black Oni before he becomes a threat, he eventually witnesses Hideyasu's strength while spectating one of his battles, becoming extremely worried that the Black Oni is actually working with the Genma. During the time after the Omen Star appears, Hideyasu questions his father about it, and Hideyoshi tells him that it is a signal for the Toyotomi clan's global takeover, promising not only complete conquest for them both, but that when the time comes, once he succeeds Hideyoshi, Hideyasu will inherit the power of a god, one strong enough to shape the world entirely to his liking. Hideyasu, having near unquestioning trust for Hideyoshi and a greater desire for power thanks to Hideyoshi's teachings, begins leaning towards this plan. He is further tempted once the spirit of Fortinbras begins occasionally appearing before him, telling him of his innate power, including holding the power of the God of Darkness. These temptations leave Hideyasu far more willing to work with the Genma to take over the land. Ohatsu and the newly named Jubei learn over the next year of the existence and grim purpose of the Genma cherry trees. Not knowing of a way to free the humans trapped inside, Jubei instead regrettably decides it best to burn them, something that Ohatsu initially protests. She eventually changes her mind when they fail to find another way, and starts trying to view this as ending their suffering. This leads to Jubei gaining the nickname of Soki instead of Hideyasu, though he and Ohatsu agree to preferring his Yagyu name. They both meet up and start travelling with Minokichi in 1597, and set the same trap for Danyamon in 1598 as in canon. Instead of becoming more casual like Soki does, Jubei remains respectful and attempts to appeal to his sense of honour. But when that proves fruitless, Ohatsu is the one to shoot the support and trap the convoy of Genma trees. Jubei and Ohatsu notice the smell and realise that Danyamon has been eating Genma insects to strengthen himself, forcing Jubei to challenge him to the death. While the fight isn't quite as one-sided as it was with Soki, Jubei's high skill level leaves Danyamon significantly outmatched while Ohatsu clears out the other Genma, and Danyamon is soon cut down. The two, alongside Minokichi, begin to burn the convoy of trees, which this time is noticed by Hideyasu. While considering attacking here, he is more frustrated that Danyamon proved too weak to stop them, so decides to bide his time, while also leaving the blame solely on Danyamon's incompetence. While the two continue to hunt for more information on the trees, Akane arrives in Suruga in search of her uncle, hoping to aid him against the Genma now that Sekishusai has deemed her training complete. At the same time, Minokichi warns the two of a wicked force and tells them that a child is near enough to be caught in it, this child obviously being Akane. She is similarly startled by Minokichi, but the sight of Jubei and Ohatsu immediately calm her down. By this point, Akane has a significantly better relationship with her uncle, with a similarly positive relationship with Ohatsu, often calling her Aunt Hatsu. Jubei questions why she's here, and he and Ohatsu are left shocked and impressed to learn that Akane has already been deemed strong enough to inherit the Jubei name once her uncle retires. While he wants to test her skill, Minokichi reminds them of the incoming wicked force, but with how little time is remaining, they are unable to get back into hiding before time runs out, leaving them caught up by hordes of Genma. With the three of them fighting, however, they are able to push through and reach the sealed Genma, unsealing and slaying it with relative ease. Afterwards, they reconvene at the hideout, and Akane mentions that on her travels, she heard rumours of cherry trees appearing in the fortress in Sata Pass, which Jubei and Ohatsu correctly assume to be Genma trees. While Akane has no ulterior motive to go there this time, she's happy to stick with the two for the foreseeable future, and so they all infiltrate the fortress, with Akane getting them in the same way while Jubei and Ohatsu draw the Genma's attention. As the three climb the fortress and reach the roof, this time without Akane splitting off, the group are intercepted by Hideyasu, who recognises Jubei and Ohatsu as the ones burning Hideyoshi's trees, but does not recognise Akane and asks her identity. They ask him the same, and he introduces himself as Hideyasu Toyotomi, son of Hideyoshi and heir to the Toyotomi clan, causing the party to address him as the infamous Blue Demon. The party readies themselves for a fight, but Hideyasu praises Jubei and Ohatsu for their victory against Danyamon, acknowledging that no ordinary warriors would defeat such a foe, especially after being strengthened by Genma insects. With this respect made clear, he asks why they oppose the Toyotomi clan, and they respond with the fact that countless innocents have been slaughtered by his clan and the Genma, as well as the Genma's horrendous track history. But Hideyasu claims that his clan brings order to what is clearly a land reduced to chaos. He denies harming innocent people, claiming that they only assault criminals and bandits, but Akane angrily disagrees. Ohatsu asks how he can think that, and Hideyasu says that he receives this information personally from Hideyoshi. Seeing that they also care for the suffering of innocents, he offers them a chance to simply leave the fortress and be spared death, but they refuse, leading to a 3-on-1 fight. While Hideyasu is clearly too strong for each of the group individually, they are able to coordinate their attack well enough that he is unable to land a decisive blow, though he still proves too much for them to overcome entirely. Mid-fight, Jubei in particular challenges Hideyasu's ideology, questioning how ruthlessly conquering is merciful in any way, while Hideyasu claims it to be necessary to end the chaos of the land, and that once all is united under Hideyoshi, there will be peace. Eventually, the fight ends in a draw, and Hideyasu, while initially too strong to be outright defeated, is beginning to flag, while his opponents have a bit more energy left in them due to their teamwork and coordination. Recognizing that he can do no more, Hideyasu, frustrated at his failure, is forced to flee, leaving the party to successfully enter the fortress unhindered and burn the trees inside. With the trees in Satar Pass dealt with, the party decides to head towards Kyoto. However, they are intercepted by Tenkai in Sawayama, with a battle between himself and Jubei initiating after showing an illusion of Ohatsu and Akane's bodies, enraged at the apparent death of his sister and niece. Though Tenkai proves formidable, Jubei comes out the victor, though notices mid-battle that his blood is preventing him from landing a killing blow, deducing that Tenkai is actually an Oni warrior, leading him to realise that Ohatsu and Akane are not actually dead. Before introductions are made, the two are forced to defeat the large Genma guarding the area, after which Ohatsu and Akane are able to reunite with Jubei. Tenkai recognises Akane and Jubei as relatives of Sekishusai, but is slightly unsure of Ohatsu, to which she explains that she is the second daughter of Oichi, raised in the Yagyu village after Odani Castle fell to Nobunaga. Tenkai introduces himself and explains his goals, leading to an alliance. Once back at the hideout, he informs them of Roberto, who is currently imprisoned within Sawayama's dungeons, and Tenkai asks Akane to act as a decoy, perking her up by complimenting her speed and agility. Ohatsu is quick to catch on and follows suit, flatly admitting that her speed is beyond the rest of the party. With Ohatsu's encouragement, Akane is quicker to agree, and Jubei compliments Tenkai's handling of the situation. While Akane acts as a decoy like normal, Tenkai takes Jubei and Ohatsu with him to the dungeons, and they find Roberto's cell. Jubei and Ohatsu remain respectful and offer to free him, but Roberto simply frees himself and begins walking away. Jubei asks where he's going, and with Tenkai translating, he initially answers aggressively that he's going to kill Frois, but Ohatsu steps in and asks for his help. Upon properly seeing her, Roberto briefly stops in his tracks, but quickly regains composure and says that Frois is his only concern. Ohatsu responds by offering to help him find Frois in exchange for his aid, and while Roberto is initially hesitant, he decides to bite and asks what they want. At this point, seeing that the negotiations are seeing results, Tenkai steps forward and in Spanish tells them of their goals to defeat Hideyoshi and that they need the power in his arms. Roberto is surprised to know that Tenkai is aware of the exercising beads, and after some thought, agrees on the condition that he takes no orders and that while he will help them, the death of Luis Frois still takes priority to him. Tenkai agrees and relays the information to Jubei and Ohatsu, who attempt to introduce themselves. But while he gives no answer to Jubei, he at least gives a sigh towards Ohatsu. With this alliance arranged, Roberto leads them through the nearby secret passage in order to reach the castle's keep directly, effectively missing the initial encounter with Sakon altogether. Once they reach the top, Claudius and Rosencrantz are taken aback, and upon realising that they may be a genuine problem, immediately decide to flee, disappearing in front of them. Roberto is left furious at his target's escape, but Tenkai quickly diffuses the situation after saying that the most likely place that they will be now is Kyoto in order to finalise the Daigo Blossoming Festival. After reconvening with Akane at the hideout and getting her up to speed, Tenkai proposes that they use the Akechi tomb as a staging point for the attack. The group arrive, and after splitting up to begin the assault and reconvening at the temple gate, they are confronted by only Claudius and Rosencrantz. As expected, Roberto flies into a rage and immediately attacks his target, and while Ohatsu attempts to calm him down, Jubei, Tenkai and Akane confront Claudius, only for Sakon to appear and attack them. Ohatsu, after losing track of Roberto as he rushes off after Rosencrantz, turns to notice Sakon's approach and is forced to aid the others against him and Claudius. Thanks to their strength in numbers, Sakon is defeated and rendered into incredible pain as he struggles to fight the influence of Ophelia's mask. However, as they all turn their attention towards Claudius, they are suddenly rushed out of nowhere by Hideyasu, who appears strengthened this time. It is learned that after his failure to stop the party from burning the trees in Satar Pass, he became so angered at his own weakness that he began hunting for ways to get stronger, which led to both Claudius and Hideyoshi to encourage him to consume Genma insects to increase his strength. Claudius mockingly tells the party to enjoy the festivities and disappears as Akane attempts to lunge at him. Hideyasu, clearly bitter about their previous encounter, asserts that he is far stronger this time and promises to repay them for his past humiliation. While Ohatsu once again attempts to talk him down, Hideyasu is already more battle crazed due to the insect's effect on his body, and they are forced to fight off his assault. While the insects do strengthen him, he also puts less thought into his movements, making his attacks slightly easier to react to. As a result, while they are unable to gain control of the fight, they are able to prevent him from landing a killing blow. The fight is long and spans the entire area, slowly moving towards the temple itself. As the fight wears on, however, Hideyasu finds that the power gap between himself and his foes is slowly shrinking, eventually leading to the party forcing him back until they reach Hideyoshi. By this time, the strength that the Genma insects had granted him is very noticeably fading, and with him outnumbered 4-1, he is finally left defeated in front of his father. At the sight of this, Hideyoshi expresses disappointment and anger at Hideyasu, blaming Ieyasu for his failings. Tenkai notices Hideyasu's weakened state and realizes that his second sword, Requiem, is an Oni purification sword, and while it isn't fully negating the insects, its constant close proximity is somewhat inhibiting their effects. Hideyasu claims that the Oni are somehow draining his strength and begs for aid from his father, but Hideyoshi makes his anger known, claiming that he shares his real father's weakness. This shocks Hideyasu, who until now has never earned Hideyoshi's ire like this before, and watches as his father prepares his full godly strength to kill them all, knowing that none of them can stop him. Hideyasu desperately turns to Nine to stop this, but she simply laughs as Hideyoshi launches his attack, not knowing that she is simply a disguised Ophelia in a similar fashion to Yodo in canon. Knowing that there's no way to fight off the warlord, Tenkai blocks the attack and begs the party to head to Enryaku Temple at Mount Hiei, telling Hideyasu to go with them, calling him humanity's last hope. While he doesn't want to work with the Oni, he recognizes that there is no other option, and Jubei and Ohatsu help him escape with them and Akane. They eventually reach Mount Hiei, though Hideyasu remains quite antagonistic towards the party, still seeing them as the enemy and openly admitting that this alliance is only temporary, at least until he learns why Hideyoshi and Nine turned on him. However, as they make their way through the area, Hideyasu collapses onto the ground, the Genma insects having been triggered to eventually transform him into a Genma tree. He is left distraught upon learning from Minokichi what is happening, further questioning why Hideyoshi would do this to him. And while the party sadly prepare to deal the finishing blow before he's transformed, Arin appears and offers another solution. Instead of taking him to the temple, she simply tells him that he can purge them immediately, but requests his trust to aid him, knowing that he is still not yet an ally of the Oni. Desperate to stop the insects, he agrees to trust her, and she tells him to impale himself with Requiem, much to the shock of the rest of the party. She explains that thanks to the sword's proximity, the effects are being somewhat inhibited, giving him around 6 hours before he turns, rather than the 2 that Ohatsu had in canon. Soki realises that this is why their effects faded in Kyoto, and after initially remaining unwilling, he finally concedes and does as Arin tells him. The process is far from painless, but after removing the blade from his torso, his breathing begins to stabilise, and he slowly opens his eyes to realise that the insects are in fact gone. While the party is relieved at Hideyasu's purification, they remain on edge as they expect him to fight them again. But Hideyasu instead thanks Arin for saving him, and she invites them to take refuge within Enryaku Temple for the time being. At this point, however, while Hideyasu decides to at least avoid conflict from here on, Arin still notices that he hasn't fully accepted the Oni yet, so she does not yet tell him of the trial of the Oni Gate. Since both Yagyus are already here, with the new Jubei being a core member of the party, Stage 9 is skipped entirely, and the party takes no real action until hearing rumours of Roberto being taken to the Sana Spagna, working out that Luis Froist is likely involved. Instead of Akane, Hideyasu is the one not involved in the conversation, instead trying to process everything that has happened since the battle in Kyoto. Arin approaches and asks if he's okay, and he expresses his inability to understand everything that has happened. He asks her what she knows of the situation, but before she can explain, Jubei approaches, telling them that they are leaving to find Roberto. Hideyasu, however, decides against going with them, at least until they mention Luis Froist, which changes his tune. He agrees to accompany them, if only to try and get answers from him. The group reach Rosencrantz and are horrified at the experiments he has been performing on Roberto, including Hideyasu. He demands answers to Hideyoshi's actions and what the Genma truly are, but Rosencrantz attempts to manipulate him, questioning why he is doubting the word of the man who raised him for his entire life. Hideyasu begins to hesitate, further struggling to process all that he's hearing, while the group angrily attack the scientist. While he still struggles to turn on his father, seeing again the near-death state that Roberto has been left in angers him enough to join in the fight, and Rosencrantz is soon defeated. His trap triggers, however, and Genma surround them, only for Luis Froist to regain enough control to beg the party to escape with Roberto, something that further disturbs Hideyasu. After the group get Roberto back to Mount Hiei to rest, while Ohatsu watches over him, Hideyasu questions what happened with Luis, unaware that he and Mitsunari are actually possessed, but the group are unable to answer. Eventually, while Hideyasu in particular is trying to process it all, Roberto finally wakes up, and noticing that the party saved him, finally speaks to them in Japanese, but becomes wary at the sight of Hideyasu. Jubei assures that they have an agreement as of now, and Roberto, seeing Hideyasu's conflicted expression, drops the topic for now. Hideyasu, while also still distrustful, tries his best to at least not be rude, admitting that he should never have been subject to such vile experiments. Once Roberto gets back on his feet after 2 months of rest, he decides to head to Sawayama Castle to retrieve a personal item that was left there. When the party elect to go with him, however, Arin decides to ask Hideyasu to stay behind, offering to tell him all she knows of the Oni and Genma. Hideyasu agrees, grateful at her offer, and the rest of the party leave for Sawayama. While the events at Sawayama remain identical, Arin tells Hideyasu of the Oni's and Genma's history, and finally clarifying for him that his power is in fact the power of the Black Oni, the most powerful Oni in existence. The entire time she answers any questions that she can concerning the nature of the Oni and the Genma, and by the time that the party return, Hideyasu, while still needing to know more from the Genma himself, becomes a little less confrontational with the rest of the party. As they later discuss their next move, Roberto suggests heading to the Toyokuni research facility in Sakai, specifically mentioning that they would likely learn more about the Genma's overall plans, something that catches Hideyasu's attention specifically. He agrees to go with them in the hopes that he will finally gain some answers. Upon getting inside, Hideyasu finds the main computer and tries to access it, but Roberto eases him aside and does so himself, learning of the Genma's plan. He tells the others that he knows what the Genma are planning, and Hideyasu demands to know, and Roberto promises to tell him after they destroy the dark stone within the facility that fuels Hideyoshi's power. Hideyasu protests to weakening Hideyoshi, but the party talk him down, claiming that there is no other way, and he begrudgingly concedes. After destroying the 4 generators, they reach the basement and find the dark stone, only to be intercepted by Claudius, who further attempts to manipulate Hideyasu, but by this point Hideyasu isn't falling for it anymore, and demands answers of his own. Roberto takes the opportunity to begin punching the stone, revealing that his power exists for this purpose, causing Claudius to attempt to stop him. But Hideyasu, now tired of the Genma's manipulation, protects the Westerner, and a fight begins. Naturally, Claudius is beaten back, and as the Darkstone is destroyed, Hideyasu demands further answers about his plan, with Roberto revealing his identity as Claudius this time. Claudius finally reveals his plan to revive the Genma God of Light, and Hideyasu, finally realizing that everything, down to even the foreign war, was the Genma's doing, accuses him of manipulating Hideyoshi, to which Claudius mockingly confirms. Utterly enraged, Hideyasu's anger completely explodes, and he transforms into his impure black Onimusha form, launching himself towards Claudius, forcing him to immediately flee. With Hideyasu raging, the group are forced to try and calm him down at least enough to revert back to his human form, to which they eventually succeed. And Hideyasu, with the knowledge of the Genma's true goals, agrees to head back with the party to learn the rest from Roberto. After he explains not only their plan, but also of the existence of the Triumvirate, who are all taking the appearance of those close to Hideyoshi while continuing to use him, finally has Hideyasu accept that he spent his life fighting on the wrong side, and he takes a moment to apologise to the rest of the group for their conflicts, to which the group accept, glad to see him want to redeem himself. When Roberto expresses uncertainty of Ophelia's disguise, Hideyasu chimes in, suggesting that she may be taking the form of Nine, basing his argument on her reaction when he tried to beg her help in Kyoto. While not 100% certain, the party agree that Nine is the most likely possibility. With Hideyasu's final renouncing of the Genma and acceptance of the Oni, Aren suggests that he is ready to unlock the full extent of his power as the Onimusha, explaining to him the trial of the Oni Gate and warning him of the time limit. He asks why she never brought this up before, and she explains that with his loyalty still at least partially with Hideyoshi, they couldn't risk him gaining that power and siding with him and the Genma once again. While slightly annoyed that a source of greater power was hidden from him like this, he understands her reasoning and enters the gate, and it goes the same as in canon, with him reaching and defeating Garganto only to be held back by Marcellus as the door closes, and breaking open the door from the inside with his newly unlocked power. After this, Hideyasu's arc pretty much returns to normal, though he is still a little more abrasive than his canon self. The group agree to head to Sakai and use the San Felipe to reach Shimabara in time, and as they bid Aren farewell, Hideyasu speaks up and thanks her for helping him understand his power and finally see his true failings. Aren responds happily, glad that he was able to be better than the Genma wanted for him. Once they reach Sakai and find the San Felipe, they are approached by Sakon, and while Jubei elects to stay behind and face him, Hideyasu decides to join him, and they work together to fight him off. With Hideyasu now no longer distrusting the party, he and Jubei cooperate extremely well, and Sakon is left entirely outmatched. Hideyasu has Jubei run ahead and reach the ship first while he holds off the Genma that have appeared, and as Jubei manages to get on, he helps the others pull Hideyasu when he makes the jump. Once they all make it on, Jubei extends his hand, thanking Hideyasu for the help, to which Hideyasu reciprocates, a clear mutual respect having been developed between them. Unfortunately, Sakon still manages to reach the ship, but is stopped by Tenkai before he is able to destroy it. He and Hideyasu work together to purify Sakon, breaking Ophelia's mask and causing him to fall from the ship, allowing them to leave the port and sail to Kyushu. Hideyasu takes the time to apologise to Tenkai as well for their conflicts, and Tenkai simply expresses relief that he is no longer a pawn of the Genma, accepting his apology. Mid-travel, Hideyasu is again visited by Fortinbras, but with him now identifying the spirit as related to the Genma due to his frequent appearances while fighting for Hideyoshi, he aggressively demands him to leave him, only for Tenkai to break contact, warning that his presence doesn't feel right. The group eventually arrive in Beppu Bay and traverse the abandoned village to find Ophelia disguised as Nine, this time focusing her manipulation on Hideyasu, but the Black Oni simply responds by slashing at her, correctly believing that she is in fact Ophelia, forcing the Genma to reveal her true form and attack. Naturally, the party proved too powerful and she is beaten, this time with Hideyasu finishing her off instead of Ohatsu, cursing her for her cruelty, though she is able to discreetly escape in the same manner. The assault of the Shimabara facility progresses more or less identically, with Claudius initially holding the party back until Sakon intervenes, and Claudius is beaten after Roberto destroys the second Darkstone, his death also killing Rosencrantz and Luis Frois. Sakon directs them to Nagoya Castle to find the space folder, and the party, with 1 week left, manage to make their way to Hizen with enough time left to use it. Once again, with Munenori no longer an enemy, nobody is left with Ophelia, so there is no battle before she escapes using the device, leading straight to Minokichi's sacrifice, using the power granted to him by the late Mitsuhide Akechi to send the party to the Akechi tomb. Jubei and Ohatsu in particular are left distraught over his sacrifice, having known him for over a year at this point, but the party gather themselves and make the final assault on Kyoto and Fushimi Castle. With only the Triumvirate left to defend the capital and an even larger party thanks to Jubei, one-on-one battles across the board aren't a thing here. While Roberto requests to face Rosencrantz alone to find the avenged Luis, Claudius is left to face both Tenkai and Ohatsu, while Jubei and Akane both face off against Ophelia, leaving Hideyasu to reach Fushimi Castle and confront his father. While the rest of the party defeat the Triumvirate, Hideyasu finds Hideyoshi in Fushimi Castle and begs him to stop, telling him of the Genma's lies and manipulation. Hideyoshi believes none of it, revealing the Genma seed in his chest that retains his power despite the destruction of the Dark Stones. Hideyasu's continued pleas fall on deaf ears, with Hideyoshi claiming that he is a lost cause and blaming Ieyasu once again for his failures. With this, the two finally face off in a final battle. Of course, this battle goes the same way as normal, and Hideyasu finally defeats his father, only for Ophelia to limp in and take the seed, revealing that Hideyoshi was in fact nothing more than a pawn. Hideyoshi curses his foolishness, realising that he sacrificed Nine for nothing, only for Ophelia to use the seed to awaken the Genma Mother Tree. With Nine used as the sacrifice for the tree, she kills Ophelia the same way, but then begins attacking everyone in the room, including Hideyoshi, rather than trying to reunite with him. But Jubei and Akane arrive in time to cut both father and son free, with Tenkai, Ohatsu and Roberto arriving soon after. The party fight off the tree's assault as Hideyoshi backs away from the fight, and Hideyasu succeeds in purifying it, freeing Nine in the process, who proceeds to chastise Hideyoshi for the monster he became. Hideyoshi, however, just lets her vent, agreeing that he allowed the Genma to corrupt and use him. He thanks Hideyasu for stopping him, and he grabs the seed, cursing it and the Genma's promises. However, as he does so, the Omen Star arrives and the seed begins to react, transforming an unwilling Hideyoshi into the serpent god Fortinbras. With this new threat, Tenkai gives Hideyasu his gauntlet and tells the party to give it their strength, hoping that it will be enough to allow Hideyasu to combat the god. As a result, he is fully awakened as the Oni god of darkness, and a fight between them begins. This time, however, during the fight, there are moments where the Genma god either holds back or falters as it attacks, giving more openings to the Oni god. While the aspect of Fortinbras is in primary control, these moments are Hideyoshi desperately trying to struggle against him, and as a result, the fight ends slightly faster with Hideyasu as the victor. With Hideyoshi finally reverting back to his human form, the battle between the gods leaves him dying, and they have a similar interaction as in canon, with Hideyoshi asking Hideyasu to be a better ruler than him. As Hideyoshi draws his last breath, the true Fortinbras appears and incapacitates the party as they encourage Nine to escape. But Hideyasu defies the god in the same way as normal, and the party finally prepare to face him. Eventually, he is beaten, and Hideyasu uses Requiem to destroy him entirely, with his own full godly powers awakening once Fortinbras is gone. This time, Jubei is the one to wake up first, praising Hideyasu for the final defeat of Fortinbras, but Hideyasu reveals his plan to destroy the Omen Star, knowing that he will not survive the process. Instead of begging him to stop like Akane does, Jubei asks him if there's really no other way, and Hideyasu confirms, but also cites the reason that he had fought alongside Hideyoshi and the Genma for his entire life, so this was his chance to finally atone for all he's done. After hesitating, Jubei somberly accepts Hideyasu's decision and finally thanks him for his aid in defeating the Genma, extending his hand to him. Hideyasu reciprocates with a smile and bids Jubei a final farewell before he reaches the star and destroys it entirely. The party awake and escape Fushimi, and once the mother tree falls apart entirely, they all mourn Hideyasu's death before going their separate ways. With no one left to inherit leadership from Hideyoshi, the Toyotomi clan dissolves entirely, leaving Ieyasu and the Tokugawa clan to take over without the Battle of Sekigahara. Though she still survived the battle against Fortinbras, Nine chooses instead to become a nun, and was soon relocated to Osaka Castle once it was given to the Tokugawa clan after the Toyotomi clan dissolved. While wanting to pursue Ohatsu, having still fallen in love with her like canon, Roberto decided best to first return to Espana and ensure that they never use the Genma again. Tenkai returns to Enryaku Temple and leaves with Arin to ensure that the gauntlet is sealed, much like in canon. As for Jubei, Ohatsu and Akane, they return to the Yagyu village to report to Sekishusai, their mission now complete. They still visit Hideyasu's grave 2 years later, but soon return again to the Yagyu village with Minokichi. And that's where we'll leave it for today. This just kinda came to me while I was going through Onimusha 2 again once Murad released his Onimusha 2 HD project. Given that nothing was really stopping her anymore after Nagamasa dies in 1583, I kinda started to wonder what would have happened had Oyu actually gave in and went with Jubei. I was quite excited once I started exploring the idea of Munenori actually being a protagonist rather than a villain, so I just kinda took that ball and ran. I was also quite interested in exploring a Soki that actually allies with Hideyoshi too, though given how overpowered Soki is compared to the rest of the party, he kinda had to turn against him in the end. As for Roberto, I kinda debated as to whether or not he would pursue Ohatsu in the end, so not really wanting to weigh in either way, I decided to keep it a bit open-ended. Perhaps he does return later to find her, perhaps not. I'll leave that up to you lot. Lastly, the last mention of Nine, the wife of Hideyoshi, is actually quite historically accurate, believe it or not. Historically, after Hideyoshi's death, Mitsunari Ishida and Ieyasu Tokugawa both vied for control following the power vacuum left behind, which eventually led to the Battle of Sekigahara in 1600, which ended in victory for the Tokugawa clan and the execution of Mitsunari. As for Nine, she willingly gave up the eastern ward of Osaka Castle to Ieyasu in the same year as Hideyoshi's death, and even sided with him in the conflict against Mitsunari. She became a nun very soon after her husband's death and took the Dharma name Kodai-in Kogetsuni, to which she was known until her death in 1624. Even with no Hideyori to take control of the Toyotomi clan alongside Mitsunari, the only thing that would change here is there being no battle in 1600, so I just wanted to keep her epilogue historically accurate. With yet another history lesson out of the way, I'll sign off here. Thanks for watching everyone. Until next time, Danish out.